What are the facts about police violence and how can we pave a way forward? I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. First of all, it's good to be back. There are a couple of housekeeping things I want to get to before we start today's episode, and the first thing is that the show is going to be undergoing a format change. Now, prior, I was doing 3 short episodes per week, but now I want to change that up into one larger episode, being released on Monday morning. I think this will allow me to do far more research into a single topic and create a more fulsome episode to deliver to you guys. And aside from that, I've been making some good progress on my book. The first draft is complete and I'm moving on to the editing phase now. If you are unaware, my book revolves around some ideas that I have about how you can live a more fulfilling life, and it will be free. So if you're into that, keep an eye out and I'll let you know when it actually drops. Now, I do wish that I could be coming back to some good news and some fun things to talk about, but in my absence, the world has seemingly tossed itself into chaos. So, here we are. Today, talking about police violence, everything that's happened thus far, and how we can pave a way forward. As you must all be aware of already, there was a lot of mounting tensions building up in America, and there was a straw that broke the camel's back. That was the killing, very obvious killing, of George Floyd. That man did not deserve to die, and the police officer, who stupidly placed his knee on his neck for a prolonged period of time, deserves to go to jail. I understand the outrage surrounding that because it's just a horrific video. Having seen it, witnessing a man slowly have the life drained out of him, that's not something anyone wants to see, and the cop should be held accountable. At the same time, North America does have a history of racism, like many other civilizations note, but the question is, where are we now? And before I get to that, I want to talk about just one more issue of the many that has come up that really surprised me. It was something just so incompetent on behalf of the police that it boggled my mind that it even happened. That is the story of Breonna Taylor. The police was set to perform a no-knock raid on a perpetrator in the middle of the night. Now, unfortunately, they picked the wrong house. This is straight out of a comedy movie. How could that much incompetence be had at the police level? It's unacceptable. So, they break into the wrong house of Breonna Taylor's, as she is there with her boyfriend, and they end up killing her. Now, just take a second to imagine it from the perspective of Breonna Taylor herself. Someone breaks into your house in the middle of the night. Even if they are yelling to you, police, police, we're the police, that means nothing. Because in your mind, you know you are innocent. And on top of that, it's not comforting because anyone could be yelling police as they break into your house. It's actually a common tactic to lull the house owners into a sense of false security. Now, keep in mind too, America is a highly armed population. When you put all of these factors together into this bubble here, where you're breaking into someone's house who is just not a criminal, who doesn't expect to be raided, and people are armed in America, somebody is likely going to die. It might be the police or it might be the innocent homeowners, but this is something that should have never happened. It is quite literally just complete insanity from the top down to have a police force identify the wrong house for the police to go into that house and kill somebody. All of those cops there, I don't even know if it's the cops actually who should be held accountable. They were just following the orders. Whoever issued that order at the highest level of command has to be held accountable because a mishap like that is just not acceptable. And on top of that, things like these no-knock raids in the middle of the night, they're just not the brightest idea because of issues like this. And let's say you did go to the right house and you break into someone's place where they're expecting for the police to show up. Are they going to go quietly when you wake them in the middle of the night and you scare them and you freak them out? And keep in mind, America is highly armed. It just doesn't seem like the best approach to doing anything, and it comes with tremendous drawbacks to it. Now, that's going to be part of my recommendations going forward, but before we get to that, let's move on to some facts about police violence now, because I feel like it's been muddled. A lot of things on social media are just wrong, and let's clear it up now. So the first thing that I want to talk about is coming from the Washington Post, and they write that in 2019, about 1,000 people were shot and killed by the police. Now, further, we can combine that with some data from Statista. Of that 1,307 people who were killed by police were white, 235 were black, 158 were Hispanic. The remainder was either other or unknown. From that, you can see that about a quarter of the deaths are attributable to black people, and about 30% goes towards white people. Some will correctly point out that black people are overly represented in this sample here. They only make up about 13% of the American population, but they appear in double the proportion for police-related killings. The question, though, is why is that discrepancy occurring? The very woke people would like to boil it down just to one variable and say that racism is the culprit, but I'm not convinced that's one, helpful, or two, going to lead us to where we have to be. Now, racism, undoubtedly, is part of the equation. It's one component, and you could argue that the other components here stem from racism, but we have to talk about them individually. There is no doubt that there are racist cops out there, but to say every cop is racist, that is incorrect. What is really behind all of this? It's an amalgamation of factors. It's far too simplistic to try and boil it down to one thing. Any real change can't come from that because we don't have our sights set on the appropriate targets. Now, what factors am I talking about? There's a bunch of things here that go into the equation, like crime rates, education, healthcare, social services, career paths, just believing in yourself, having father figures, things like that, and a plethora of other items here that all together combine to create the puzzle that we have before us. I'll touch more on these later, but let's go back to the stats now. We just established that there was about 1,000 killings in America in 2019. Now, in 2018, there were about 10.3 million arrests in America. I wish there we had the 2019 figure as well, but Statista doesn't just have that available for some reason. Maybe it'll be updated later on, but I do believe the 2018 figure will suffice. So let's take these items here and break them down further. If there are 10.3 million arrests annually in America and about 1,000 people killed by the police each year, what is the chance of dying when faced with a police arrest? We can see here that the answer is it's extremely low. We're looking at about 0.01%. Of course, when killings do happen, they are tragic, they have to be called out, and they deserve to be scrutinized with the highest level of just perception. I agree that the police are there to protect us, and even one unjust killing is too much, but let's do some more work with this stat. We know that some percentage of these killings here, of the 1,000, would be things that can be justified, such as police defending themselves against an armed suspect or someone who intends to do harm to other people. Further, what I just gave you there, the 0.01%, that's based on the idea that the rate that we're dividing by is arrest. It would be lower if we use something different, like police interaction, for example. Not all police interactions lead to an arrest, and if somebody wanted to, they could figure out what the interaction is, and I guarantee you it's multiple times higher than the number of arrests. And if you divide that, the rate of police killings based on that factor there is going to be far lower than the already low 0.01%. Now, nothing I just said there should take away from what I iterated before. Even one unjust killing is far too much, and we have to do things to correct for that, as we'll get to in time. But first of all, we really have to sit down and ask ourselves, are we in sync with the reality of the situation? You can agree that change has to occur, but are these numbers what you expected? Based on everything you've seen in the outrage and the hysteria, I do have to wonder. Now, let's see how the world does globally in terms of police killings to frame this discussion more holistically. According to World Population Review, in terms of raw number of deaths, America ranks 5th. That is extremely high, and I would argue unacceptable. They are behind the likes of Syria, Brazil, Venezuela, and the Philippines. It's just insane for America to be ranked that highly. Now, we do have to nuance the discussion a little bit, and this nuance here is going to change the equation by a lot. First of all, America has a massive population. When you talk about just raw totals, of course we can expect that America is going to be higher than other countries. On top of that, we're dealing with one of the most armed civilian bases in the world. When you combine these two factors here, it does make sense that America is going to be edged higher. If you are a police force and you are dealing with a lot of people who have guns on them, people who are gun owners, well, that might change the way your interactions play out. If the country wasn't so gung-ho on being armed, maybe that itself could alter the numbers, and that's only one factor as well. There are a lot of things here that go into the puzzle. But when we adjust the measure to the rate of police killings per 10 million people, America falls down the rankings quite drastically. They aren't even in the top 30 when you use this more applicable metric. Now, let's be clear, that's still not amazing. Simply just not being in the top 30, they should be far lower than just that given their relative advancement. Improvement is drastically needed, but have we been sold the entire picture? I don't think so. Now, for fun, let's see where Canada is. We have deaths at around 30 people per year caused by police. That is drastically lower than America. But keep in mind too that places like Japan have just 2. The UK has 3. That's quite amazing. We should be trying to find a way to move closer to that while maintaining some degree of reason. Now, let's move on to something that many of us can relate to, just police stories. Like most people, I've had good interactions with cops and bad ones. That combined with research leads me to proposals that I've talked about for years already. Now, if I have to think back, my worst cop interaction probably happened when I was traveling in a foreign country. So I was walking down a not so busy path. It was pretty empty. And I noticed 2 cops just staring at me. Of course, I look different. I'm not of the culture of the country that I was visiting. And these cops wouldn't let up. So I continue on my way. And they block my path and they tell me that they want to search me. So it's basically a stop and frisk. They open my bag. They open my wallet. They're going through everything. They're patting me down. To me, this was quite interesting. It was the first time I faced that kind of situation. Now, I will say, it was pretty sketchy because there was no one around me. I did feel that there was a risk of something going bad, and if it did, there would be no recourse for me. If the police officer decided to take some money out of my wallet or decided to take some of my belongings, well, what could I do? Could I go to the police station and try and plead my case even though I don't speak the language there? No, I couldn't. What if the police tried to beat me up for something? Could I do anything? The answer would be no. There was 2 of them and they're armed and I'm not. And just to be clear, I had nothing on me. It was definitely a wasted effort on behalf of the police there. So they check everything. Luckily, everything goes well and we go on our ways. But I couldn't help thinking there could be one thing added to the equation that would make me feel tremendously better. And I assume too that would be the case for anyone. If the police had visible body cameras on them that were always recording, then I could have some confidence if they tried to do something crazy, well, it would be caught on camera. Then I would have a way to defend myself and justice would presumably be served. But that's only one part of the equation. I'm going to talk more about the second half when I get to my recommendations, but that's one thing that I think has to happen. Now, I will point out something too that's very interesting. There is some way that we are being influenced with our perception of the police. So, if I was told prior to going to that country that the police there are very racist towards Canadians, for example, and let's assume they knew I was a Canadian, if they did the same thing to me, I would probably believe that it was racism. As the cause, they saw a Canadian and they didn't like them, they had a bias against me, and that's why they chose me to search. Now maybe that's true. Maybe that was the case there, but I don't know it. It's also possible too that police officer was having a bad day. Maybe he was just a jerk. Maybe he wanted to rough me up for other reasons. We don't know. This psychological game though is being played in America. To a lot of the black population, they're being told repeatedly that the police are racist. So, when they encounter a negative instance of a police encounter, what are they likely going to attribute to the motive there? If you are told repeatedly that the police are racist, well, you might believe that it was racism. But we don't know that. As I said, it could just be the cop being a jerk. And we can do a thought experiment here. If somebody like a white person, was to be pulled over by the police and they were being rude, you would probably brush that off and continue on your day. But if you just replace that white person with a black person, the same cop, and the cop behaves in the same exact manner, that person may believe that they were being racist, even though we don't know it. This type of calibration on our racist meters may be an issue, because it may lead to making claims that are not true. At the same time, I don't really know if this can be considered, maybe this is one example of white privilege, that you can just go about your day and not have to think if the copy's being racist to you. But that cuts both ways though, because we don't know. They're just people. They could be just being a jerk. They could have been willing to do the exact same thing they did to you to someone else regardless of color. But in America, we lack that nuance in the discussion. And it does make me wonder if there is a delta here that has to be accounted for. There's another example that I can give of this type of thinking. I was dining with an acquaintance one time. We got the same thing at the restaurant. It was maybe a burger with fries, and the waitress comes and gives us our plates. Now, the person I'm with has received a little bit less fries on their plate versus mine, and they tell me, is this racism? Now, this caught me off guard for a second because it exposed to me just how we are morphing as a society. So, there are a lot of things here that could have happened. Do we think that that waitress went out of her way to purposely give you less fries on the plate because of your skin color? Or was it because she just didn't care? One plate had less fries and it was a matter of chance. Maybe she was racist. We don't know. And that's the crux of the equation there. We don't know. But why do we posit racial motives to these people though? This is where the conversation is heading. That's where the culture is going or has gone. We are making these assumptions based on little evidence here at the individual level. Now you might say the police institution itself is racist and you can try and argue that, but when we talk about individual people though, and the way they behave, to attribute those same motives to them, even though they may not apply, I don't think that's the best way to go about living. Because let's say the situation was reversed there and I got less fries. Would I think it was racism? I wouldn't. But do we know anything about the motives of the actual waitress there? We don't. This is a situation that we do have to tackle and talk about. We aren't having the right discussions though, and I don't know why. But now let's get back to the topic of police. As I mentioned before, the killing of George Floyd was atrocious, and that cop has to be held accountable. There are numerous instances of police injustice that you can show me, and I'll agree with you. They are terrible, and they should have never happened. The police are a position that comes with great power, and with that comes great responsibility, but we can't expect all of the individuals to uphold that. They are just people, and they're flawed. Some of them are power tripping, some of them are just jerks, some of them are crazy, and we haven't screened properly for that. And yet, we have these people who are not trained enough, people who aren't willing to put in that work to learn. And they are in this position of great power. There's going to be issues with that, and we need to find ways to mitigate for it. Now, the first thing that I believe has to happen is across the board, across the whole country, Canada and America. Police have to be wearing a body camera that operates 24/7 while they're on duty. It cannot be something that they can turn off. These stories that come out with police wearing a body camera, and before something happens, before they shoot someone, they turn the camera off. That cannot be the case. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose there. It should be a policy mandated into law across the board that as a police officer, you have more power than the typical civilian. And with that comes responsibility. You have to be willing to take that into account. You have to wear the body camera. If you're a good police officer, well, nothing bad's going to come of that. It's actually a dual protection method that's going to help whoever is right in the situation. If the police is justified in carrying out a whatever it is, an arrest or use of force, well, the camera will prove that. And if the person is innocent and they're justified in being angry about being treated badly or being arrested or killed, the camera will prove that. That's why across the board, if you are a good cop or a civilian or someone who cares about justice, this is a very common solution that we can all agree upon. I think it has to be mandated too, not just state by state, province by province, city by city. Across the board, there's no reason not to do it. It's a positive thing that's going to help everyone. And as I mentioned in my story, it'll make everyone just feel safer interacting with the police because they know there is an eye watching now. You could call it the public eye. The camera is going to be recording things, and when I get to my next recommendation, we're going to know that there will be accountability. Because there have been cases where a cop is wearing a body camera and they do something heinous but never gets out. That's a separate issue, and here's my solution for that. We have to really establish a measure to independently review these things here. A review board or a branch of the Justice Department that all they do is take complaints from the police, take the body camera footage, and they review it. And they can't be the police who review the police because we already know there is conflicts there. And it's baffling to me how that's been the case for so long. The police unions are very powerful and they will protect their people. The independent part in the independent review board is imperative. It has to be a group of people who have no ties to the police and no bias, and they have to review everything with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that any complaints are addressed. These two things in tandem, I think, will solve the vast majority of issues with the police because, first of all, we bring in a safety measure for people to feel okay interacting with police and they become less nervous. And knowing as well that the footage will go directly to an independent body, well, that means that there will be accountability. If the footage just went to the chief of the police and he was cool with all the cops or went to the union, well, it would be useless then. And we've seen that happen. Police who commit crimes get off easier. Police who commit crimes get covered up by their friends in the law enforcement. That there is a systemic problem. I don't know if it's systemic racism, but it's a systemic issue with the police. It's malpractice. It's them covering each other when they shouldn't. If they want to restore the public's faith in them, which they do need right now, this is how it's done. You create accountability and you create a clear plan to make sure that goes to the people. You make everyone wear body cams regardless of some officers complaining about it. And I don't know why you would complain anyways, because as I pointed out, it's protection both ways. If you are a cop who has to arrest someone forcefully and they're complaining, if you are in the right, the camera will show that. But if there are bad cops out there who are abusing their power, which we know there are, the camera will reveal that. So it will protect good cops and it will get rid of bad ones and it will protect civilians. There is no loss here. The only people who would argue against body cameras are the police who want to have free reign. It is not acceptable because accountability has to be had. If these two things can come into fruition in the short term, I think America and Canada and all the places protesting right now will cool down because that's a step forward that will help everybody. Now, the third thing too that I think has to be done is we have to get rid of these no-knock raids in the middle of the night. It's just nonsense. There's no reason to be doing it, especially when there's a chance you get the wrong address, as we've seen here. The Breonna Taylor situation. It's so heartbreaking. That can happen to anyone. The police get the wrong address and they kill you because of it. That's insane. It's a major injustice, and I don't think that policy is needed. It just has too much room for things to go wrong. Now, finally, I support the idea of adjusting police funding to better suit the community. If the community has certain needs and the police budget's too large, maybe we can reallocate that to produce a better outcome. And at the same time, I've seen the case made that police are doing too much. Maybe that's true as well. If you're dealing with someone who mentally has a problem, they have to be handled a certain way. If you're dealing with somebody who has X issue, maybe you need a social worker to go in, a psychologist to go in. Maybe we have to diversify our response team and not just have it police, firefighters, and ambulance. Maybe we do need a social team, maybe a psychology team. These reforms here are all good conversations to have because I do think it's true. The police are the general Swiss Army knife of the emergency response world. They get called into many situations and perhaps they're just not capable of handling that many. If we reduce their scope, they will therefore need less funding. And maybe we can fund a new division or a new team who can take care of the things that the police can't do. But there are things the police have to do. And I believe that falls into more along the lines of things like a home invasion, a break-in, violent perpetrators and whatnot. But if something is relatively peaceful and you need someone to go in there to defuse the situation, yeah, okay, I'll hear that conversation. Maybe we establish a new unit. These are all good things here that I back. But adjusting funding doesn't inherently mean defunding or abolishing the police either. With that, let's segue into the into the changes that I do not support at all. And I'm surprised I have to say this. The first thing I need to point out is the broad nuance and opinion that is being ignored here. Some people are saying all we want to do is defund the police. We don't know about abolishing. That's not our agenda. What do you mean about our though? Who is this we? It's a lie to say that nobody is talking about that, because no, there are many people talking about that. The radicals are 100% proposing that we abolish every police force. I just don't know where to begin with how asinine this idea really is. There are just a lot of people, regardless of color, who depend on the police to maintain peace and justice. Of course, there are cops who do stray off the path and they do evil things, but the institution is there to protect people. We need to reform it and change it and make it better to do its job effectively, but the idea of straight abolition, do you want to enter a world of anarchy? Because that's how you do it. They're not thinking about the consequences. I don't even know how you can come up with the idea. I think it's a good one. If you abolish the police and there is nobody there to maintain law and order, what's going to happen? It will be the rise of vigilantes. It will be people who arm themselves and who carry out justice from their own purview. It will be the Wild West. That's not something that anybody wants. Only the radicals think it's a good idea because for some reason they believe that by abolishing the police and pouring all of that money into a service, social services, hotlines, whatever, that crime will disappear. That is not true. I believe that crime will be reduced and maybe we have to defund the police proportionally. If there is less crime, less cops, but the idea of going to 0% right away, because we believe that funding a social service will get rid of all crime, is just not compatible with human nature. It's just a foolish view of how the world works and it will lead us to destruction. If you want more debts and if you want more crime and if you want more problems, then yeah, abolishing the police is the way to go. Anarchy, free reign, forget the government, forget the institutions is just not a logical point. Let's just move on because I'm just surprised by how that's become a legitimate talking point and how people are failing to nuance the discussion here. Abolishing is not the same as defunding. We don't know what the proper path forward is, but we do know that abolishing isn't in the mix there. Outside now of that ring of people, the next tier is those who want to defund the police, and here we can have some reasonable conversations. This means reducing their funding, but keeping them around. I think that's fair. I think it might make sense in certain circumstances. Here we can talk. Perhaps the police are overfunded and the money can produce better outcomes elsewhere. Let's have that conversation. Let's do the analysis and let's figure out the budget for that. I am on board with the idea of defunding police where it is needed. I'm not on board with the idea of abolishing them or defunding them to the point of not being able to function. You have to be smart about how you go about these changes here. Then, outside of that circle, you have the people who want change but they aren't convinced that defunding is the way to go. Maybe we have to increase funding. Maybe we need money to establish the proper body cam controls, to establish that independent board of people to review the body cam footage. Maybe we need money to fight legal battles with the union who have made the police so impervious. Maybe we need money to increase screening and provide better training. We don't know. Maybe it's more funding, maybe it's defunding, maybe it's restructuring. These are all possible conversations to have. Then, outside of that circle, we have the people who think everything is just fine. These people are on par with the abolitionists in my opinion, in terms of their madness. There is no reason why change shouldn't be discussed. The bottom line is that there is no shortage of bad police officers. We have them. We need to find ways to control for that irresponsibility, to make sure that people are functioning as they should, to bring the police killings down to a more digestible figure. We do that through change. Is America ready for this mature conversation though? I honestly don't know. We seem to have politicians, high-ranking individuals, just pandering and dodging questions and just being overall insane. Now I want to play a clip from the Minnesota city councilor who gave just the craziest response to someone who asked them, what do we do if we're being broken into at night and we need someone to call? Because the city councilor is talking about abolishing the police. And her response just highlights how insane many people have become when talking about the issue here. So here it is.
Do you understand that the word dismantle or police free also makes some people nervous? For instance, what if in the middle of the night my home is broken into? Who do I call?
Yes, I mean, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors. And I know, and myself too, and I know that that comes from a place of privilege, because for those of us for whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in that reality, where calling the police may mean more harm is done. And so,
where to begin with this? First of all, you can find no shortage of important people making equally or even more baffling points. It's almost like they are reading from the Bible of wokeness, trying to get as much points there as they can. First of all, when you talk about dismantling or abolishing the police, which people and politicians are actively doing, people do have valid concerns about them. One of them being, who do you call when you are being robbed or somebody poses a threat to your life? To respond to that by saying that that question comes from a point of privilege is just one, stupid, and two, not helpful. Does she not realize that's not only white people calling the cops when their house is broken into? Minorities do it as well. It's meant to protect people from a threat that's being imposed onto their life. There is just so much confusion here. What privilege is there in being in a position where you are helpless and need someone to come potentially save your life? Not only are people with privilege being robbed, it can happen to anybody. Does she not understand that? White, black, brown, you can get robbed at night. Somebody can break into your house and try to kill you. She seems to leave people with one choice here, given the asinine response to arm themselves and carry out vigilante justice. She doesn't seem to put it together that if you are being invaded at night by a stranger who may want to kill you, you wouldn't even know it. They might be trying to do it, they might not be, they might just want to rob you. You can't make that decision. You were worried about your own safety, and the police are there to handle the matter, because supposedly they are supposed to be trained in that. Now I get it. The training sucks, they're not prepared, they're not properly made to handle the situation effectively, but here's something that I don't think she's taking note of either. Even if you are black, it is unlikely you will make things worse by calling the police. Why? Because first of all, somebody has broken into your house who you don't know. They may be trying to commit a harm to you. They may try to kill you. You may have a family who you have to protect. Maybe it's multiple people. You don't want to be in a situation like that with no recourse. Now, although the police killings are high, they do kill innocent people. There is a below 0.01% chance of being killed by the police if we're using arrest as the basis there. And here, you'd be calling for help. You wouldn't even be the focus of the police officer. When she seems to posit that if you are in a vulnerable position being robbed or whatnot, and you call the police, you may bring more harm upon yourself, show me the evidence. Let's back that up. It's a pretty big claim to be making, because she seems to posit that if you are black, well, you're better off not calling the police if someone's trying to commit a crime against you. I don't know about that one. Now, of course, as we've already outlined, there are many issues with the police. There are problems here that have to be ironed out. Black people are being killed disproportionately. We need to find the root cause of that and take care of them. We need to make sure that innocent people are not being killed by the cops. And also, we have to make sure that innocent people are not afraid to call the cops, because that puts them in needless danger. We have to list out the issues and talk policy. We have to find a way to make it safe for everyone. I think doing something like the body cameras mixed with the independent tribunal is a good start. To get rid of these nighttime raids, to adjust the funding, maybe you increase it, you decrease it, whatever works, to find a way forward like that. These woke politicians annoy me to no end, because first of all, they don't answer the question. Second, all they're doing is parroting nonsense and they offer no practical solutions. If you tell someone with legitimate concern about what you're conjuring up, you want to abolish the police, and someone says, hey, what do we do if X happens, because it can happen? If your response to that is that that's coming from a point of privilege and you dismiss the point, you leave them no option but to take matters into their own hands. That's not an America that anybody wants to see. The fact is, we do need the police, but we have to make them better. You can have these two opinions in your mind at the same time. I don't know why it's so hard to digest that. If we wanted to, we could get the body cams started tomorrow. We can enact the proper justice reforms and standards that same day so nobody has to be afraid. Let's do it. While instead, the politicians here are spouting things like this nonsense, and it's no wonder we can't be on the same page about anything, because everyone's pushing an agenda, trying to score points, instead of talking about and uniting us around a cause we can all support. How tragic is that? These guys need to do their jobs, period. Now, I want to end off by discussing the effects of social media. It's a powerful tool. I do believe 100% that without social media, that cop who killed George Floyd, he would probably be free or be serving a greatly reduced sentence for the blatant murder that he committed. Accountability is a major issue in the police force, and social media brings some semblance of control to the equation, because we won't let that slide. If we see a major injustice, we can all unite around that. We can all hold that cop accountable for what he did, and we should. And I'm glad that social media brought that to light, because just the thought of that cop still doing his job after what he did here is insane. That should never happen, and it highlights the flaw in the system. People talk about systemic. This is a systemic issue right here. The non-accountability of the police force. That's a very specific issue that we have to tackle. Now, at the same time, it is also driving us crazy. Social media. The echo chambers here are so strong. I don't even know if you can pierce them. The polarization continues to ramp up. There is an ideology of us versus them forming, quickly dividing the landscape into friends and foes. I'm not sure that's the best thing for us. The vast majority of people are on the same page about the fundamentals here. George should not have been killed. That was crazy. The cop is a monster. The police, they have to change. That's just the bottom line here. We have to discuss it and we have to debate it. A problem comes up though when radicals masquerade as just the normal populace, as the masses, which is possible on social media. We needlessly drive a wedge between us. No, abolishing the police is foolish. Reform is what we need, and we can agree on that. So why talk about abolishing anyways when it's, number one, not practical and only there to create a divide between us? Reform is it. That statement itself is inflammatory online for virtually no reason. I don't know why it's controversial to say that. No, creating an autonomous zone, as some protesters did, is silly. That is not the norm. Even here, on the topic of protesters, there is a massive disconnect with reality. We have layers here. Not all protesters are the same. The outside layer holds the looters, the arsonists, and the vandals. The inside layer is the responsible protesters who are doing as they should. They're having their voice heard while not destroying their community, which will have a tremendous downside in the future for that same community. And it's crazy too, because a lot of them are hindering the population which they seek to improve. There is no logic there. The protesters are not a monolith, and we need to make distinctions. At the same time, I am even more amazed by the police in this matter. They will terrorize peaceful protesters, as we've seen on video, and not do anything to stop the rioters and the arsonists. What? The world really is upside down right now. This makes no sense. This craving for unearned moral superiority is powering much of the chaos. There is productive change and ways to go about it, and we have efforts that are hollow. I'm sorry, but posting a black square is hollow. Seeing these rich white celebrities create a montage of them apologizing for something or singing a song, that's hollow. You are not a saint above your peers because you did that. And you shouldn't act like it. The moral superiority just radiating off a bunch of people, even though it's unearned, is appalling. At the same time, it says nothing about you if you choose not to post these hollow sacraments so you can be inducted into the tribe of the woke. How about we actually go out and do something productive? How about we have a conversation? How about we put forward a proposal? How about we talk more about realistic things that we can do to move forward in unity, not making a grand display every little thing? These are all valid approaches here. We'll see where this ship heads, but I do know that social media is steering us right now. Is that the best captain? I don't know. Although it did bring accountability as a positive thing, it comes with some baggage as well, such as driving us crazy, raising the temperature, increasing polarization, being trapped in an echo chamber, creating an illusion where we seem to think that the fringe is an accurate representation of real life, where the radicals are putting forward just insane plans here and they're being consumed by people because that's all they're seeing. There is no diversity of opinion really here. There is no nuance. It's their way or the highway. That's where wokeology is going these days, and I don't think it's woke at all. I think it's actually the contrary. There are very real issues here that we have to tackle, but we are creating useless divides among the people. The fundamentals we can all agree on, and even beyond the fundamentals, the actions there. I think most people would agree that reform and change is needed. Now you talk about abolishing. Well, over there we have some issues. The killing was unjust, clearly. We have to do things here to correct for the injustices, but the temperature isn't at a point that's going to create that environment. It's just not at a place that's productive right now. We are greatly underestimating the profound effects that social media is in fact having on us. I know that if we don't find a way to turn the polarization down, we're in for trouble. America is pretty much tearing itself apart at the seams, and that is spreading to much of the world right now. My recommendations were made. I've repeated them ad nauseum. I think it's a good place to start, and if we really wanted to, we'd be pushing for those to happen tomorrow. That's where we have to begin the conversation, and it does have to be a conversation. We have to back up the things we're saying, and we have to debate, and most importantly, together, we have to find a way forward. Hopefully, they'll manifest. We do need some unity right now, badly. So, that now brings us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow. And in particular, for today's episode, I do think the message is worth getting out there. You can also find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. I'll see you soon.